I work at the Crystal Lake Public Library, and this is a guitar. You might be thinking this because it's National Guitar Month, and you'd be wrong. It's International Guitar Month. But my mother taught me well, and I know it's rude to show off in front of people, so I'll return to the reason you showed up to this video in the first place. Let's talk about poetry. We've studied lofty and populous poets. We understand what good poetry sounds and looks like, but we have yet to meet a modern era poet. Today, all of that changes, because we'll be learning from a fellow Chicagoan and prodigy of blues poetry, the woman who once said, "I'm a writer perhaps because I am not a speaker." Gwendolyn Brooks was born in June of 1917 and moved to Chicago at only 6 weeks old. Her father worked as a janitor, but he had previously hoped of becoming a doctor. Her mother was a school teacher, but also a classically trained pianist. They encouraged her to pursue her love of poetry, and by age 13 she had published her first poem in a children's magazine entitled Eventide. By 16, she had written over 75 poems, which she submitted to the Chicago Defender, a popular African-American newspaper. Her work consisted of ballads, sonnets, and free verse. I will preface today's video by saying that Brooks wrote a ton of poems. Like, girl was on her game. So all the poem excerpts I'm going to mention are basically from the Essential Gwendolyn Brooks collection, written by the lady herself. Now, back to Brooks. Gwendolyn worked as a secretary in her 20s to support herself while she continued writing in various workshops at the time. She also married Henry Blakely Jr. in 1939, and together they had 2 children. During this time in her life, Brooks got a lot of positive attention. In 1943, she was honored at the Midwestern Writers' Conference. She had finished attending junior college and had begun working for the National Association of the Advancement for Colored People. From her experiences working with young black children and her life growing up in urban Chicago, she released her first collection, A Street in Bronzeville, in 1945, which was an instant success. She quickly published her second book, Annie Allen, which follows the experiences of a black girl as she grows into adulthood. It was this book of poetry which won her a Pulitzer Prize, making her the first African American to win. By the early 1960s, Brooks had published her first novel and began teaching a career in creative writing. She taught at Columbia College, Chicago State University, and Northeastern Illinois University, plus several others. Through all of this, she published her third book of poetry, The Bean Eaters, which includes probably her most famous poem of all time, We Real Cool. Let's take a brief look at this poem.
The pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school. We lurk late, we strike straight. We sing sin, we thin gin. We jazz June, we die soon.
So, a little bit shorter than we're used to, but it accomplishes its goal. The poem's about being rebellious and facing consequences for your youth. I'm assuming that the pool players are high school kids.
We die soon.
Meaning they know that there's an ending looming over them. She also uses the phrase,
we jazz June,
which personifies June as bleak and standard, while these students have injected their own lively magic into it. They've made it jazzy. Brooks wrote this poem at the height of the civil rights movement in America, so this kind of rebellion and ominous ending is likely connected to the struggle for black civil rights. She also went on to publish her longest poem, In the Mecca, in 1968, which was nominated for the National Book Award and took on political unrest more overtly. This shift is very notable in her poetry because it demonstrates Gwendolyn's newfound candor in her writing. She had never stayed away from confronting social issues, but as a new established writer, she had the sway to move the public with her writing. In an effort to uplift other black writers around her, she left her major publisher and began attending a writers' club at Fisk University in Nashville. Throughout the next decade, she worked with Broadside Press to publish her next 6 poetry collections, including Riot, Aurora, Beckonings, and the first volume of her own autobiography. She also began writing poems dedicated to promoting social and political leaders such as Nelson Mandela. These later works are described as producing genuine emotional tension by her critics. I think it's fascinating to look at Gwendolyn's work as it evolved through the civil rights movement because she was always a writer. So we have lots of works to compare. Specifically in D.H. Melham's biography, Gwendolyn Brooks, Poetry and the Heroic Voice, she really digs deep into the development of 4 decades worth of poems. Soon after, Gwendolyn was elected as the poetry consultant to the Library of Congress. She was 68 at the time and was the first Black woman to ever be appointed to the post. As the Poet Laureate of Illinois, she took it upon herself to educate other young writers by visiting local schools, prisons, and hospitals. She also sponsored annual library award ceremonies, which she funded out of her own pocket. Her goal was to bring together poets of all races and backgrounds and encourage them to write without fear and with confidence. She sadly passed away in Chicago at age 83 in December of 2000. I think it's really important that we study people like Gwendolyn because she was a natural-born poet. She loved to write, and she used her voice to uplift and inspire those around her. You really couldn't ask for a better role model. There's a great children's picture book by Suzanne Slade entitled Exquisite, available as an ebook through the Overdrive and library website. Definitely worth checking out. It's got some beautiful, touching artwork. Gwendolyn Brooks was a standout poet and activist. Her story strikes me because of how young she started writing for the public. She had the ability to lend an ear to other artists and never strayed away from unpopular subjects or gave in to the discouragement of her time. A mastery of poetry techniques, she managed to bridge the gap between the academic poets of her and later generations. She was truly remarkable. Remember to check out the library's website for any of the sources that I've mentioned. I'll close today with a treasured quote from Gwenny herself. Do not desire to fit in. Desire to oblige yourself to lead.